Thanks for staying with us right here on Sunrise as we continue this morning. Buying a car isn't as easy as it seems. Now, there are many different costs, payments and contractual agreements to consider, so it's better not to be hasty when buying a car. It can get overwhelming, so here to help us dissect the different aspects is Mark Smyth, who is the motoring editor of Business Day and Ghana Msibi, original equipment manufacturer at Westbank. Now, of course, you can be part of our conversation by giving us a call on 011-447-1742 or 2570. That number again is 011-447-1742 or 2570. Also taking comments on our Facebook as well as Twitter pages. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So let's start with you, Ghana, because you get to deal with the car manufacturers. That's really what this interesting title of yours means, right? So when people are looking for cars, shouldn't they be coming to you first to actually understand the terms? And what are some of the things that the people get to ask?
Yeah, so I think the model that we obviously utilize in South Africa is predominantly dealer-based. And from a Westbank perspective, we fully support that model. And as such, there's more than qualified individuals referred to as finance and insurance managers at the dealership who are obviously, more than equipped to unpack those complexities. It's not as complicated as it's obviously meant to sound. I just think it's obviously some of the terms, and if you don't necessarily engage with the right professionals, it may be a little bit blurry.
Okay, he says it's not as complicated as it is, but I mean, we just have to have a conversation with a lot of people. They'll tell you that there's just so many things. What do I need to think or consider when I'm thinking about buying a car?
Like, I think there's there's one fundamental thing which we always say to everybody, and that is buy the best car you can afford. And so, you look at whether it's new or used. Buy the best car that suits your circumstances. And I think this is where a lot of the discussions that come in with the finance professionals at the dealership, I mean, people like Westbank and so forth, is to look at what your actual circumstances are and also to predict what your circumstances might be, because things can change very, very quickly. So you take whether you're a single person or whether you're a couple or whether you're a family, buy the car that suits your circumstances, but understand that those circumstances can change, and basically set your budget first and foremost, and then go and shop. Okay,
so how do I determine that I can afford that car? I mean, what sort of options do I have? What do I need to be thinking?
Okay, so from a Westbank point of view, we've got what we call the calculator, where you would be able to utilize obviously inputting your income, your expenses, and I think as
I can always
Mark,
cheat that.
You always cheat that.
I can always cheat that. I'm just saying, because I really want this best car that I think I can afford.
Yes, so that's obviously the first process, and we would hope that you don't cheat the process. But secondly, we would perform what we refer to as a credit validation, and we would obviously then look at ITC and look at what your real expenses are in relation to outcome, and we would operate within the ambit of the National Credit Act, within those parameters in terms of being able to grant you credit. Okay. So there's a lot of processes behind.
Okay, so let's get into the terminology. The words like service plan, warranty, things like that. What do I need to understand about some of those?
Yeah, certainly if you're buying a new car, a lot of them are going to come with a service plan or a maintenance plan. I mean, a warranty is the fundamental thing which has existed since, sort of cars began, really, which is where the original equipment manufacturer, the car maker themselves, actually say, well, we will cover these parts in the event that they fail, break down, whatever. Then you get service plans and maintenance plans, which basically are fantastic in terms of budgeting for your vehicle. So if you go and buy a new car, then you don't have the service costs apart from things like wear and tear items like tires, maybe brakes and things like that. So you can build that into your budget. It makes it a lot easier. If you're buying pre-owned in the used car market, you have to account for those service costs.
Okay, so they're always costs that are sort of grouped together, like balloon costs. What are those things?
So a balloon payment is effectively a deferred amount on your initial installment that you would pay at the end of the contract. So, a simple example is if you purchase a vehicle for 100 Rand and you decide that you are only going to finance, obviously, 60 Rand of that, we would defer the 40 Rand. You would pay the interest, obviously, through the life of the contract. And at the end of the contract, you would then have an option to either refinance the balloon payment or pay up the vehicle or trade the car in.
So do it. Don't do it. Balloon payments are a last
resort that you would. So I think it's a very valid point. So.
But isn't that sometimes something that people use to buy a car that they can actually not afford?
Basically, what they're doing is so you've got the various terms now up to 72 months, and a lot of people will say, well, I really want this car costing 150,000 or 200,000 or whatever, but I can't afford the full the standard repayment, so they will defer that balloon payment to the end, but you're still going to have to pay it, and it's going to accumulate the interest. So it's not the ideal way to do it, and probably not always the smartest unless you're a really clever accountant type.
Okay, so that's that. Okay, so let's talk about the terms in a case like that. Someone's going to buy a car, which is a second-hand. They're dealing with a dealership. How do you guys get involved?
So firstly, I think there is a protocol around the dealerships that we deal with through what we call an MSA, Master Sale Agreement, which I think, back to Mark's point, really talks about certain code of conduct and principles of operation. And in events where there is a disagreement, we would try as best as possible to assist the consumer by engaging with the dealership in question. And in most cases, we do find that dealerships are quite responsive. Again, I mean, I can't speak about Zakela's case in particular, as I'm not sure who the dealership is and how reputable that particular dealership could have been. But in most cases, we do find that from a Westbank perspective, we do get quite great cooperation from our dealers.
All right, so we're living in very difficult economic times. As you said earlier on, then things change and then cars get repossessed. So let's talk about that process. What rights do I have before it gets to my car being repossessed, and how do I need to, paying is avoiding it, but if I find myself in that situation, what are the steps to take?
Yeah, it's very difficult. Ghana's probably the best person to talk about on this one, in terms of the banks of all the financial institutions. They're very good these days at helping you, because I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to remember that when you finance a vehicle, you don't own that vehicle until the last payment is made. So if you buy a car through somebody like Westbank owns your car, so they don't want to repossess that car. So there are things you can go through.
So I think most definitely, I mean, picking up from that point, so repossession is really the last thing that a financier wants to engage in, because I think there's a number of repercussions. And I mean, you've obviously purchased the vehicle, and I think it's quite a sentimental buy. So before we even get to the stage of repossession, there's a whole process, firstly around engaging with the consumer in light of trying to rehabilitate the process. Now, for those that do cooperate, arrangements can be made, and the finance agreement itself can be restructured accordingly, so we can agree in terms of different terms. But you've got to be able to cooperate. Most consumers, in some cases, decide to go for a run with the vehicle and disappear, which makes it very difficult from a financier perspective to try and help that person who runs away from you, as you can appreciate. So from a Westbank perspective, we've got a dedicated team that ultimately would engage with the consumer, try to reach agreeable terms to try and avoid that. It's something that we don't do.
Okay, so as we wrap up, gentlemen, things that I need to know. Interest is always like a discussion that people are like, okay, should I go for a fixed one? How should it work?
Yeah. So look, I mean, I think the choice between what we refer to as linked or fixed. So linked is effectively going to be varying again to the prime interest rate, and then fixed remains fixed throughout the lifetime of the contract. Is really quite dependent on, firstly, when you purchase the vehicle, as a typical example. So if you're purchasing when rates are high and the outlook is that it will subside, so we would advise that consumers consider going for more of a linked kind of an arrangement. But if you are obviously on the bottom end and the outlook is quite negative, as what we've seen recently, it's really to try and fix it. And again, that talks to Mark's earlier point in terms of being able to get some level of consolidation in terms of the market volatility. So when it is fixed, you obviously would not be subjected to any changes in interest rates, and therefore you can budget accordingly, and you'd be able to manage that properly.
Ghana took all the time. Do you have anything to add as we wrap?
I think just very, very quickly, choose your budget, select what you're going to buy, and then choose the best and the safest, which is also important. Car
Best
you can buy,
and safest.
Best and safest.
Okay, great stuff, guys. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
That was Mark Smyth, the motoring editor of Business Day, and Ghana Msibi, of course, from original equipment manufacturer at Westbank. We continue with more right on Sunrise.